Hello, hello, hello. This is Narisha, your host of the Discovering Me podcast. And yes, today I am excited to share with you Lessons in Transition Part 2. So, today I wanted to talk about dealing with triggers while in the midst of transition or healing. So, for those that don't know, a trigger is something that when it happens, it brings on a response that for me usually results in the symptoms of anxiety. So, nervousness, anxiousness, shaking, all the things, headaches, nausea. Headaches and nausea are my most common symptoms when I'm triggered. So, but I'm still learning how to recognize my triggers because for so long I kind of just let things go and forced my emotions down. So I don't notice when I'm triggered because my brain is used to responding in a way that I just don't recognize. So that actually reminds me of this class I took back in, I think it was like 2014. It was actually a purity conference, but not the way that you're thinking. If you're a part of church culture, it was actually led by mental health professionals. They were members of the ministries within my church, and they focused on dealing with codependency and self-sabotaging behavior patterns that were usually linked to, but not limited to, like sexual sin, drug addiction, everything in between. So during that class, they taught us how the brain creates these neuron paths, and I'm not a mental health professional, so I might not be using the exact terminology they used or maybe even the right words. But anyway, it was basically about how the brain, when you're learning a habit or a skill or routine or a behavior pattern, how it creates a groove in your brain, or maybe it was a neuron path in your brain that eventually becomes an auto response. So like, for example, whenever, let's say like I flunk a test, right? So whenever I flunk a test, I feel sad. And so I go buy ice cream and potato chips. So like the first time that happens, I may make that choice, right? Like, oh, I'm sad. I'm going to go get ice cream and potato chips. It's because it's going to make me feel better. So I go buy them. So eventually my brain is going to associate that feeling of sadness after flunking a test with I need or I crave ice cream and chips to feel better. So I may not even think about it, but when I flunk the test, my brain just automatically is like, oh, I want ice cream and chips. And so I go buy them. But the problem is with me is that connection is lost. So like maybe some of you guys feel this way too, but I don't ever notice the feeling of sadness that would be, the cause for the trigger or whatever. Like I don't get that emotional response. Like I don't remember that emotion. I just notice like, oh, I'm craving ice cream and chips. So I don't realize that the habit has now become something that makes me basically what I'm saying is I don't realize that this has now become something that when I feel like a failure, which is a similar feeling to flunking a test, I want to eat ice cream and chips. So every time I feel like a failure, I want to eat ice cream and chips. And I've now forgotten that the reason that is because I was sad. So basically, for a long time, I dealt with the issue of I can't stop eating chips and ice cream. It makes me feel unhealthy. I feel sick all the time, but diet plans don't work. I've tried everything, etc. So that's just like an example. So that's kind of like where I'm at. And recently, I've been doing the work, like I've told you guys, to notice my triggers. So I've been praying for God to help me to notice when I'm triggered so that I can, work on that response. I've been working through past traumas in therapy so that I can recognize when something makes me feel a way emotionally, but I haven't fully figured out like what those feelings are or why they feel them yet. So it's been difficult because, over the last few weeks, I've been triggered a lot. Be careful what you wish for, right? Because I just feel like there's been at least 4 different scenarios that I can remember where I was triggered in the last month. And I'll share those with you guys. But I mean, I'm not going to go through all of them most likely because I feel like after a while I'll be like just saying the same thing over and over again. But the most clear example for me is the other day my husband and I, like, we were having a conversation. Like, it was just a Saturday morning. We woke up, we were hanging out, and we were talking, and we were just joking with each other about our quirks, right? And we do this often, like, just about the things that both of us, like, are weird about. Like, for example, I, like, have this, like, sensory thing where, like, if I step in a wet spot, like, it makes my skin crawl. Or if his hands are wet after he, like, washes them and then he goes to, like, hug me or something, like, I'm so skeeved out by the fact that, like, he touched me with wet hands. And so we were talking about things like that. And at one point, he had, like, made a joke or, like, said something about the fact that, like, I often will, like, if I think that I'm right about something, like, I'll just be like, oh no, I'm right. And then when I realize I'm wrong, I don't necessarily say, like, oh, I was wrong. I just go, oh, okay, well, whatever. Because in my mind, like, it wasn't that big a deal. And so, like, I don't know, I forget exactly what we were talking about because I got triggered. So now my memory is, like, kind of weird. But he said something, and I was like, no, that's not always. Oh, it was about misplacing items in the house, right? And he was saying, like, sometimes when things go missing, like, I'll just be like, hey, babe, where's this and this and that? Just assuming that he is the one who had it last. And he'll be like, feel like attacked, like, kind of like, oh, okay. Because I guess I, like, maybe have a certain tone or something when I say it. I don't know. He's obviously going to be more sensitive to that than me. But he was saying how, like, I'll often do that. And then, like, if it turns out that, like, he finds it in my area, like, for example, the remote, I'll be so annoyed because I just did all this stuff and I finally get 30 minutes to myself while the baby's taking a nap. So I'm like, oh, I need to find the remote so I can watch TV. And I can't find it. So then I usually, I won't say always, I usually put the remote in the same place every time. But this, I guess, I don't always do it. So, but when the remote goes missing, I'll often be like, where'd you put the remote? Instead of, like, asking, like, hey, did you see the remote? It comes off very accusatory, I guess. And so he was telling me about this. And like I said, it was a very lighthearted conversation. Like, he wasn't, like, complaining or anything. He was just literally casually bringing it up. Like, oh, yeah, like, it's so funny because, like, you do this and, like, whatever. And I was like, yeah, but 90% of the time you are the one who loses it. And he was like, that's not true. And then I don't know what happened, but suddenly I felt, I guess, insecure. I don't even know what I felt, but all of a sudden I started to shut down and I just felt like embarrassed and sad and like a failure. And I mean, all of this was also on the back of a lot of things. So maybe it was just like all the things together. But I guess I just felt like I wasn't good enough. And that's been like the reoccurring theme for every trigger I've had over the last month. But yeah, I just felt like, oh, I'm not good enough. And so then, like, I responded with something like, oh, well, I guess I'm just the bad guy then. Like, guess I'm just like whatever. And I just was like so in my feelings about it. And like, I'm having this out of body experience because, like, I recognize that I am being triggered. I recognize that I am shutting down emotionally. I recognize that for some reason, him saying this very simple thing has caused me to feel really horrible about myself, but I don't know why. And like, because of my body's like fight or flight response, like, I just kind of shut down and was like, I was laying in the bed at the time, so I like threw the covers over my head and I was just like really sad all of a sudden. I started crying and everything, and like, he's like, okay, well, I'm just gonna like step out of the room for a minute because he's like, I don't know what's happening. And so I don't say anything and I just lay there and I'm crying and I'm mad at myself and I'm frustrated and I'm like, what is wrong with me? And all these things. Long story short, we did resolve, like, later that day, like, we were driving and I told him, like, hey, so I don't really know, like, what I was feeling, but I was triggered, so I apologize for how I responded. And he kind of was like, well, I don't think you need to apologize for being triggered, but thanks, kind of. And so, yeah, so that's one example. Another example is with my work. with my job and even with my business, like, especially at work though, because I think because someone else is relying on me, that if I make any type of mistake, like I immediately am like, oh, she probably thinks I'm a terrible worker. Like she probably thinks that like I suck and all this stuff and like I'm not doing well enough, and I get insecure about it, and then I'm like, again, not good enough. And I can feel like, this is because I don't know, this is because I fail at everything or whatever. I don't know. I just immediately get triggered, and then I start responding out of that trigger, and I start feeling like, oh, well, then maybe I should just, do something else. Maybe this isn't for me, and it's because I don't have a degree, and just a spiral that happens. And it just can be, it's just annoying. It's frustrating. And honestly, now that I'm thinking about it, I think it all started back when, so this past June, my brother and sister graduated high school. Whoop, whoop. So happy for them. So proud of them. Happy for my mom. She's been doing this parenting thing for like 32 years. So she finally gets a break. They're, grown now, so she can kind of like lay off a little bit. So I'm happy for her. But back to my point. They graduated high school last month, and, their father has been in and out of their life, but he was coming to their graduation. And I don't have the best relationship with their dad, so I was already like super anxious about even like having to be in the same room for a prolonged period of time. Like I just wasn't looking forward to it. I did not want to be there, but I also wanted to celebrate my siblings, so I wasn't gonna not go. Like I really wanted to support them in this. I really wanted them to feel loved. And so I was like, all right, I'm just gonna deal with him by going to this thing, and I'll just be cordial. So like the first day, they're supposed to have the graduation the same day, but they ended up having their graduation 2 different days. So the first graduation I went to was my brother's. So I wasn't really sure. It was me, my mom, my sister, the older younger sister, and the one that was on my podcast. And yeah, so it was my brother's graduation. It was me, my mom, my sister, and obviously my brother, because it was his graduation, but he wasn't with us. So when we got there, we met him in front of the theater where he was going to be graduating. And I saw him, but like I immediately was like, no, I'm uncomfortable. I'm going to say hi, but I don't really want to hug him. I don't really want to interact. I don't really want to, give him any reason to ask me any personal questions about my life. And just to kind of give you guys background story, I have not seen this man in 13 years, for an extended period of time anyway. I may have seen him in passing, but not really for any long period of time. And the last interaction that I had with him was not necessarily a positive one. The last one I remember, I should say, it was when I was younger. I would think I was maybe, 13 years ago. I was probably 18. And no, I was probably 20. I was closer to 20. Yeah. So maybe it was less than 13 years ago, but, yeah, I was 20 and 19, 20. And he, him and my mom had broken up, and he was just, I don't know, growing up, my experience with him was he was very, for lack of a better word, we'll just say discouraging. He would make me feel very small very often. To kind of give you guys background before I get into why he triggered me. When I was 18, I had a job as a lifeguard, and we wore the red one-piece bathing suit, the little short shorts, and they gave us a t-shirt, but we didn't have to wear the t-shirt unless we wanted to. And it was an indoor water park. I don't know if you guys remember anybody from Waterbury. Cocoa Key Water Park in Waterbury used to be a part of the Holiday Hill Hotel. And I had on this 2-piece bathing suit. And at that time, I probably weighed all of maybe 115, maybe 120 pounds. I was very long and thin, but I did have a little crease in my back, as most Black women do. And I remember one time I got dressed and I was getting ready for work or whatever, and I had my bathing suit and my shorts on and my back was out. And as I turned around to walk out of him and my mom's room, because I think I had like went in there to say, hey, I'm ready to go to work or something like that. He like made this like face, because he made this like face, and he was like, what the heck is that? Ew. And like was talking about the creases in my back. I guess you could call it back fat, whatever. And like I just remember like that was one of the first times that I felt really insecure about my body, and about like how I looked. And so the reason I give you that backstory is part of the reason that I was triggered at this graduation is I got there, my back was not out, but I was wearing this dress and we were all standing in the atrium of the theater. And up until this point, like I'm uneasy, I'm not super comfortable, but I wasn't feeling any kind of way. I was just like, you know what, whatever, like I'm just going to get through this day as best as I can. And that's going to be it. And then as we're standing there in the atrium, like my mom and my sister and him keep talking about they're hot. So my mom, like she has on like these jeans and a sweater. My sister has on pants and a crop top. And their father had on like a full 3-piece suit. Somebody told him he had to get dressed up for the graduation and he kind of overdid it, but whatever. So we're all standing there and they keep saying how they're hot. And I'm like, really? You guys are hot? Like, I'm not hot at all. And like, I'm just really confused why they're so hot, because I really just was not hot in the least bit. So like, we're all just kind of like talking about that, just making small talk. And then he made a comment like, well, of course you're not hot. You're sitting there wearing, now mind you, I had on it was like a thin, long maxi dress. A little bit dressier than like a knit maxi dress. So he's like, oh, no wonder you're not hot. You're basically wearing pajamas. And I was triggered. Like, it was a simple statement. It wasn't even that big a deal. I'm not even going to harp on, oh, he's such a terrible person. He made me feel bad, because honestly, what he said wasn't necessarily a bad thing, but it just really made me feel insecure in that moment. Like, I just felt small. I felt, again, like I wasn't good enough, and like I didn't do enough, and that, oh, like how dare I like come out looking like this. And it just like sent me on this weird spiral. So like immediately I noticed the trigger and I was like, I don't know what I'm feeling, but for some reason that made me feel really bad. And so then I decided, okay, I'm going to make sure that I sit in a spot that's the furthest distance from him as possible so that I don't have to interact with him, because I didn't want to respond out of my trigger. I didn't know how I would respond. I didn't know how I would act. I know that I can be very sassy, for lack of a better word, when I feel like attacked or feel like somebody has like made me feel away. I can just be very mean. And I didn't want to bring any attention to myself at my brother's graduation. And so I was like, I'm just going to sit away from him so that I can kind of process my emotions. Or what I actually ended up doing was shoving down those emotions and talking to my sister the entire time. But, and I didn't really talk to anybody about that specifically because I just didn't feel like I was in a safe environment. So yeah, so that was kind of like the example of like where the triggers started. And from there, it's just been kind of like this reoccurring pour of like feeling insecure about things. And so I say all of that to say that I'm now finally noticing the triggers. And it can be easy for me to feel overwhelmed and just feel discouraged. And I want to like stuff the emotions down because I'm like, oh, this is uncomfortable. Like, sometimes I can feel stupid for being triggered by certain things. I can feel like, why is that even an issue? Like, for example, the dress thing, like I felt like that's so dumb. Like, I shouldn't be triggered by something so silly and trivial. But I'm learning not to allow my triggers to discourage me, but instead to encourage me. And the way I'm doing this is by changing my perspective, right? So I'm choosing to view these challenges and triggers as a sign that I'm doing the healing work. I've been working on being present with myself and my emotions. And so that's going to take recognizing how things affect me in the moment, which is how I get to triggers. You know, it's taking me being aware of the nervous system things that are happening in order for me to see what's going on, in order for me to figure out why I feel the way I do. And it's uncomfortable, you know. I mean, I think any area of change or healing is going to be uncomfortable because it's a change, it's a transition. You're learning a new way of doing a life. So in the past, I would just ignore how those things made me feel and just keep pushing through it, because it was easier than trying to deal with the emotion and the response of the like trigger in the moment for multiple reasons. But it basically, if something made me emotional, I didn't know how to respond appropriately for the setting, which is basically what happened to me, after graduation. Like, I felt like it would be embarrassing or stupid for me to feel what I was feeling in the moment. So I would ignore it and act like I was fine. And then I wouldn't, which in the moment, I talked about this with my therapist, like in the moment was fine, but then I need to go back, because in that moment, like, I don't know how to respond to it. So I just kind of shut it down. Like, okay, I don't want to respond inappropriately. So I need to just kind of like put this thing up and like get through the rest of the day, because this is not about me. Which, by the way, the next day at my sister's graduation, like, I totally like just kind of iced him out the entire day. Like, I literally sat in a way, like, my body language was like, please don't talk to me at all, because I'm just not in the space. And maybe that wasn't the best way to handle it, but that was the only way I could handle it in the moment. So, so I'm learning how to like not feel embarrassed or stupid for those emotions. So I want to start digging and figuring out, and I think I'm going to journal more around my triggers. Like, I'm going to try to do that more so that I can figure out exactly what the root is. But the problem with ignoring the emotion is it doesn't make it go away. So it just suppresses it, and your body still reacts to it later. Like, anytime that anything makes you feel that way similarly, your brain doesn't just, forget about it. It's still there. It just doesn't bring it maybe to the forefront of your mind. You don't notice that it's happening anymore. So now that I'm allowing myself to feel my emotions, I get triggered more often. I'm acknowledging that whatever just happened made me feel a certain way, and my body is responding by going into fight or flight mode. And as I learn how to properly deal with those situations, it can be extremely uncomfortable, but I'm learning to be grateful for those moments, because one, I'm realizing God is answering my prayers, right? I've been praying for God to help me to recognize my feelings and emotions within myself, and now I am. And looking at it with these perspectives gives me hope, because instead of pushing things down and later having a major mental health crisis like I did, 2-3 years ago now, I'm reteaching my brain and my body how to respond to things that upset me. So I'm learning more about why I do the things I do, why I react to things the way I do. And I'm developing a new level of self-awareness. And honestly, it makes me feel empowered, because I feel like I can make the best decisions for myself. I feel like I can teach these things to my son, which is so important to me. Honestly, if it wasn't for my husband, my son, and like wanting to pursue this business, this coaching business, I probably wouldn't be working as hard as I am, just because it's hard. It's uncomfortable. It's just so like, it's painful too. And it can feel gross for, just feel like, why is this happening, or why am I doing this? And so, yeah, I'm just grateful that I have people in my life that if it's in the moment, I'm not able to do these things for myself, which is the main goal, that I'm able to do it for them, because I do want to teach my son how to be an emotionally aware man, Black man. I want to teach him how to process his emotions and how to deal with things as they come up. And I can't do that if I don't know how to do it myself. So I say all of this to say that growth work is hard. It can be uncomfortable. There are times that I doubt my abilities and I just want to quit, but I'm choosing to see the way that God is growing me through these moments. I'm choosing to see how he's guiding me in the process. And I'm choosing to see these challenges and obstacles as God strengthening me and preparing me for what he has created me for. So I hope that helps somebody. I hope that you are encouraged by this episode. I hope that maybe it gave you a greater understanding of yourself. So tune in 2 more weeks to hear more about what I'm learning about transition. Thanks for listening. I am discovering me. Discovering me. Say my name. Say my name. My life matters. God said it first. Discovering me. Everlasting, everlasting. I am the daughter of the everlasting, loving, omniscient three. I am discovering me. Discovering me. Thank you for listening to this episode of Discovering Me. I hope that you are inspired and spurred on toward a deeper connection with God. If you're looking for a church in the Southern Connecticut area, search Southern Connecticut Church of Christ. And don't forget to tune in 2 weeks for a new episode of Discovering Me. And always remember to faithfully pursue a life of passion.